We've got our next panel over here, and the panel is Agency and Gender Norm Shift, Critical Reflections on Understanding Change. Please join me in welcoming our panelists. We've got Amita Kumari from Sidhu Kanu Murmu University, Dumka, Jharkhand. We've got Shabani Hassanwalia, producer and editor at the Third Eye Nirantar. We've got Shelza Rai, researcher, L&D practitioner, and illustrator/artist. And we've finally got Professor Nandini Manjrekar, who is a specialist in education and gender studies, who will be moderating this session. Nandini, the stage is yours.
I just want to lay out a few things. One is that, one of the things that I think we need to keep in mind is when we're discussing questions of agency and empowerment is how do we actually bring a gender lens to this understanding? And what does that gender lens actually consist of? And I think everybody's going to be looking at that, even if they don't specifically mark the perspective as a gender lens. It's important also to sort of see this whole discussion within a context of fairly radically altering and emerging times. And of course, one can debate, one can discuss what constitutes what some of us call the new times in the Indian context. But one of them clearly is that there have been norms of gender have shifted. We do have more girls in school. We have lower dropout rates. We have achieved a gender parity index at higher education, which has exceeded 1. So we are actually in new times on that front, but we're also in new times when we think of the ways in which the economy, the larger political economy, in fact, of education and questions of gender in education are also seeing shifts. And of course, we're also seeing times which are becoming even more important in these times to discuss questions of agency and empowerment in the context of questions of equality and freedom. And especially equality and freedom for those who have been historically marginalized. So I think one of the things I just want to highlight is that feminist debates on these questions are fairly new. They are historically, the 19th century, the colonial context threw up lots of questions around these issues. But the ways in which the feminist movement or the women's movement has engaged with these issues is actually of more recent origin. And in saying this, I'll leave it at this for now. But in saying this, I think what we have come to learn from feminist scholarship more recently over the last 30, 40 years is that we can't look at questions of agency, empowerment, and education specifically without looking at the dynamics of power. And we can't look at these questions without looking at questions of women's labor. And I think that the first session was extremely illuminating because especially what we heard from Kanchan, because it was a very very deep and granular understanding of what that women's labor is. And I was just reading up a bit on Jharkhand and especially the work of Nitya Rao before coming here. And it's clear that, I mean, she actually has studied Jharkhand and questions of women's labor. And it's extremely important to link the fact that women do not have access to land, even though there are differing opinions on customary rights, but even though they contribute much more to agricultural labor than men, they still do not have that access. And where they do have access to matrimonial land, all kinds of dynamics ensure that they do not actually get that land. And this is quite peculiar in some sense to Jharkhand because of its, its Adivasi, predominance of the Adivasi community. So questions of freedom, autonomy, equality are extremely important when we're discussing empowerment. And in this whole kind of endeavor in trying to sort of open out what does agency empowerment mean, there are 2 or 3 things I think that are very important. One is that it's very important to listen. And often as researchers, we really tend to fall into the frame of instrumentalism, that we are doing this project, so it has to yield certain kinds of effects. Education has to yield these kinds of, outcomes. So this instrumentalism that, where that everything, that programs, that education at large serve as instruments for something else, is something that we really need to look at. If we believe, as Manjusha was mentioning in the first session, that there is a very strong element of process in this, and we miss out on process if we don't listen to people. We don't listen to their everyday struggles. We don't listen to the ways in which young girls and women are articulating their struggles, which Kanchan brought out, that there are rights, but they don't actually are not, they're okay with giving up rights. They're okay with dowry. And why? Why they're actually doing all this is not necessarily related to Adivasi society or society within Jharkhand, but it's actually the way in which a certain kind of political economy of gender is developing. I think one of them, I think maybe Shika mentioned, that it's also that there is Sanskritization, what in sociology is called Sanskritization happening. That, the other is actually gaining status this way, and why shouldn't we also actually, try and achieve status in this way? So they're very complex factors. So one is listening, and the other is to realize that finally it is the meaning that people are giving to these things, whether we call it agency, empowerment, whatever language we may use, however we may try and put it across. What is the meaning that people are giving to these in terms of their own lives, in terms of the way they actually have to live out their own lives within contexts of oppression, within contexts of exploitation, etc., both in terms of gender, but also caste, ethnicity, religion, and so on. So the three, I think, finally, I just want to say, it becomes really important to say then, what stories do we tell? And I think this panel is going to address broadly these kinds of, along these three strands. So I'll just highlight them. One is what kinds of stories do we really tell then? Whose stories are we telling? Who are we to tell these stories? Again, positionality is very important. How do we tell these stories? And therefore, this has to do with actually research methodologies. And Shabani will be taking us through certain kinds of interesting ways in which she has worked, on methodological, on these kinds of approaches. The other is that, how do we look at questions of larger state agendas and how they are working out, and what are the different agencies carrying out these agendas? And again, in Jharkhand, extremely important, it is one of the states which has the highest percentage of aspirational districts. What does this actually mean in terms of changing the lives of people? And how do we see these kinds of interactions between the various agencies? And finally, and actually, I'm doing it completely the other way around, because that's the way I think. But finally, and actually, she's going to speak first. Amita will take us through experiences that she has as a university teacher in and dealing with so-called what were often called subaltern communities, girls who come from Adivasi backgrounds, who are negotiating the realities of their lives as they aspire to and are actually accessing higher education, very much like Kanchan's story. But here she has, she has a wide experience of many girls and how they do it. So there are various structural, and other forces that we need to actually look at when we're having this discussion. So we are going to start first with Amita, and then Shailza, and finally we will have Shabani sort of speak. So I just request you to keep to about maybe 10 to 12 minutes, and then we can have maybe a discussion. Or if we feel that there are certain, if I intervene, so I don't want to break your flow of thought, but if I intervene in between, please don't mind that. It's just to sort of enhance some kind of dialogue. So with that, I welcome all of you again, and I invite Amita to speak.
Thank you. I thank Breakthrough team for having me here, and I'm really it's an honor to be a part of this esteemed platform with all the speakers here. I teach in Dumka, Jharkhand, in a university called Sidhu Kano Murmu University, and I've been there for past 15, 16 years. And today, whatever I'll be presenting or speaking today would be broadly drawn from my own experiences with the female students in my university. And we had also conducted an action research study with the female university students, and which was mainly focused on their daily struggles to reach the university and continue their study. So, is it okay if I speak in Hindi as well? Because I want to, have a dialogue with my team from Jharkhand. मैं झारखंड से ही हूँ, इसलिए फिर से सबको जोहार बोल रही हूँ. और मैं हिंदी में इसलिए बोलना चाह रही हूँ क्योंकि मैं चाह रही थी कि मेरी जो स्टडी है, जो बहुत ज़्यादा ब्रेक थ्रू ने जो स्टडी की है, उससे जो फाइंडिंग्स निकल करके आ रही है, उससे बहुत ज़्यादा अलाइन करती है. कई मामलों में अंतर भी है, लेकिन मैं चाह रही थी कि कम से कम इन सब बातों को, जो मेरी जो स्टडी है, उसको मैं हिंदी में रखूं. फिर हम लोग आगे की डिस्कशन फिर अंग्रेज़ी में भी कर सकते हैं. आगे जाने से पहले मैं अपनी यूनिवर्सिटी के बारे में थोड़ा बता दूं कि मेरी जो यूनिवर्सिटी है वो सिधू कानो मुर्मू यूनिवर्सिटी, वो थोड़े रिमोटली लोकेटेड है. यानी कि जो मेन टाउन है या जो मार्केट है या रेलवे स्टेशन है, वहाँ से करीब 6-7 किलोमीटर दूर है. ये मैं इसलिए बता रही हूँ क्योंकि जो लड़कियाँ हैं जो यूनिवर्सिटी आती हैं, उनके लिए मोबिलिटी का जो मुद्दा है वो बहुत अहम मुद्दा है, बहुत क्रूशियल है. एंड द ब्रेक थ्रू स्टडी हैज़ ऑल्सो हाईलाइटेड द इशू ऑफ मोबिलिटी इन द कॉन्टेक्स्ट ऑफ द स्टूडेंट्स, एडोलेसेंट गर्ल्स. So they have only talked about that very briefly in their report. I wish they could have, elaborated more on that. और मैं चाहूँगी कि मेरे जो साथी हैं यहाँ पे ब्रेक थ्रू टीम से, वो बताएं कि लड़कियों को क्या दिक्कत होती थी स्कूल पहुँचने में, क्योंकि मेरे रिसर्च का ये बहुत अहम हिस्सा है. तो सबसे पहले मैं अपनी यूनिवर्सिटी के बारे में ये बता दूं कि ये रिमोटली लोकेटेड है, और जो लड़कियां यहाँ पढ़ने आती हैं वो अधिकांशतः वो आदिवासी कम्युनिटी से हैं, और लड़कियों की संख्या ज़्यादा है हमारे यूनिवर्सिटी में लड़कों से. मतलब आप समझ लीजिए कि करीब 70-30 का रेशियो है, 65 या 35 का रेशियो है. यानी अगर 65 लड़के हैं तो 35 लड़के हैं, उस तरह का रेशियो है, जो बहुत ही सुंदर सा चित्र देता है कि हाँ, लड़कियां बहुत पढ़ रही हैं. जबकि अगर हम भीतर जाएं तो फिर कहानी कुछ दूसरी हो जाती है. खैर, तो जो लड़कियां हैं वो अधिकांशतः आदिवासी कम्युनिटी की हैं, संथाल और पहाड़िया लड़कियां हैं. और ब्रेक थ्रू की स्टडी में और मेरी स्टडी में जो सिमिलैरिटी है, पहले मैं उस पर बात कर लेती हूँ. सबसे पहले जब हम ब्रेक थ्रू की स्टडी देखते हैं तो उसमें जो उन्होंने स्टेक होल्डर से बातचीत की है, पेरेंट्स से बातचीत की या टीचर से बातचीत की, तो उनका एक बहुत, उनके घर की लड़कियां पढ़ रही हैं, उनके आसपास की लड़कियां पढ़ रही हैं, इससे वो खुश हैं. एक पॉजिटिव, बहुत एनकरेजिंग, सपोर्टिव एनवायरनमेंट, इकोसिस्टम कम से कम दूर से तो नज़र आता है. हम लोगों ने भी जब अपनी स्टडी की थी तो हम लोगों ने ये कोशिश की थी कि लड़कियों से केवल यूनिवर्सिटी में बात ना करें बल्कि उनके गांव भी जाएं. तो हम लोगों ने करीब 10 लड़कियों के गांव को विज़िट किया था, और गांव में हम लोगों ने माता पिता से तो बातचीत की ही, अभिभावकों से, गार्जियन से बातचीत की ही, साथ में हम लोगों ने जो गांव के जो लोग हैं, यानी कि जो औरतें हैं, पुरुष हैं, बूढ़े और बूढ़ी औरतें, उनसे भी बातचीत की. और जो सबसे एनकरेजिंग या इंस्पायरिंग कह लीजिए, जो वहाँ से निकल कर के आया कि सब बहुत खुश थे, क्योंकि उस गांव के पूरे इतिहास में वो पहली लड़की है जो पोस्ट ग्रेजुएशन कर रही है. तो ये एक बहुत सपोर्टिव सा इकोसिस्टम हमें नज़र आया कि लड़कियों का पढ़ना बहुत ही पॉजिटिवली लिया जा रहा है, खासकर हायर एजुकेशन में. तो ये एक ब्रेक थ्रू के साथ मेरी स्टडी का एक, मुझे लगा कि कॉरस्पॉन्डेंस है. दूसरा, ब्रेक थ्रू की स्टडी में एक और बात जो उन्होंने हाईलाइट की, वो मैं रिपोर्ट की बात कर रही हूँ. मैंने रिपोर्ट को पढ़ा है, उनका रिसर्च रिपोर्ट. तो वहाँ पर जो पेरेंट्स हैं और जो स्टेक होल्डर्स हैं वो ये ज़रूर महसूस कर रहे हैं कि जो एजुकेशन है वो अपवर्ड मोबिलिटी लेकर के आती है। साथ में वो जो लड़कियां हैं जो पढ़ रही है उनके नेगोशिएटिंग स्किल्स को भी थोड़ा एनहांस करती है, यानी कि घर पे वो किस तरह से बात करके अपनी अपनी बात को रख सकें। और उन्होंने ये भी मेंशन किया है, पॉइंट आउट किया है कि जो पढ़ी लिखी लड़कियां हैं डाउरी हरासमेंट से उनके वो थोड़ा ज़्यादा बची रहती हैं। ठीक ऐसा ही मैंने भी महसूस किया जब हम लोगों ने अपनी स्टडी की। और मुझे बहुत क्लियरली याद है कि एक औरत जिसने पढ़ाई बीच में छोड़ दी थी, उसी गांव की थी। उसने उसने बहुत अच्छे से अपने एक्सपीरियंस को साझा करते हुए बताया था कि किस तरह से जो डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस है, जो घरेलू हिंसा है, पढ़ी लिखी लड़कियों के साथ घरेलू हिंसा होने के जो मामले हैं वो थोड़े कम होते हैं और वो डील भी बेहतर कर पाती है। ये बात भी निकल कर के आई थी। तो यहाँ पर भी मुझे लगा कि ब्रेक थ्रू की स्टडी जो एडोलेसेंट गर्ल्स के साथ है और मेरी स्टडी जो थोड़े बड़ी लड़कियों के साथ है, करीब 20 से 23 साल की लड़कियों के साथ, तो वहाँ पर ये दोनों स्टडी जो है वो आपस में मिल रही है। एक तीसरी चीज़ जो मेरे स्टडी का जो अहम हिस्सा है वो मोबिलिटी का है, यानी कि लड़कियां कैसे यूनिवर्सिटी पहुंचती हैं। आपने भी अपने स्टडी में ब्रेक थ्रू ने बताया कि स्कूल पहुंचने के लिए एक जद्दोजहद रहती है। कंचन भी बता रही थी, अपना एक्सपीरियंस बता रही थी कि सुबह निकलते हैं तो शाम को पहुंचते हैं। कुछ ऐसी ही कहानी हमारे यूनिवर्सिटी की लड़कियों के भी हैं। ये आदिवासी लड़कियां हैं जो, और हम लोग जानते हैं कि आदिवासी कम्युनिटी झारखंड में किस तरह से लगातार एक क्षरण के रास्ते में है, एक क्राइसिस है जो झेल रहे हैं यहाँ के झारखंड के आदिवासी समूह। तो वो साफ नज़र आता है लड़कियों के पढ़ाई को लेकर के जो वो संघर्ष कर रही है, उसमें बहुत बहुत अच्छे से रिफ्लेक्ट होता है। क्योंकि ये जो लड़कियां हैं, अगर आप यूनिवर्सिटी चले जाएं करीब 10 से 10:30 बजे जब हमारे क्लासेस शुरू होते हैं, तो आपको पैदल चलती हुई लड़कियां बहुत नज़र आएंगी। और ये लड़कियां बस 2-3 किलोमीटर पैदल नहीं चल रही है, लड़कियां करीब 10 किलोमीटर 12 किलोमीटर पैदल चल करके यूनिवर्सिटी पहुंच रही है, और ये रोज़ कर रही हैं ये। और ऐसा नहीं कि वहाँ मतलब यातायात के साधन नहीं हैं, ऑटो चलती है और हमारी यूनिवर्सिटी की एक बस भी है, वो भी चलती है। लेकिन यूनिवर्सिटी की बस में 10 रुपये आने और जाने का लगेगा, जो 20 रुपये हो जाता है। और यूनिवर्सिटी की बस में 40-45 स्टूडेंट्स चढ़ सकते हैं, जो सभी लड़कियां भी नहीं होती, कुछ लड़के भी चढ़ते हैं, तो लड़कियों के लिए जगह भी कम है। तो बहुत सारी लड़कियां बस में इसलिए भी नहीं चढ़ पाती क्योंकि वो 20 रुपये अफोर्ड नहीं कर सकती हैं। ऑटो अगर वो लेती हैं तो उन्हें करीब 100 रुपये हर दिन के खर्च करने होंगे। तो बहुत सारी लड़कियां वो 100 रुपये नहीं खर्च कर सकती हैं रोज़। 100 रुपये बहुत बड़ी बात है। तो ये लड़कियां अपने गांव से, अपने हॉस्टल से, अपने लॉज से वो पैदल चल कर के आती हैं, 7-8 किलोमीटर पहुंचती हैं, फिर 7-8 किलोमीटर वापस जाती हैं। और बहुत ज़्यादा समय न लेते हुए मैं 2 घटनाओं का यहाँ पर ज़िक्र करना चाहूँगी। एक घटना है जिसमें हम लोगों ने कुछ लड़कियों से बात की थी जो अपने गांव से यूनिवर्सिटी आती हैं। वो शॉर्टर रूट लेकर के आती हैं, मतलब जो थोड़ा छोटा रास्ता है वो लेकर के आती हैं। और उस छोटे रास्ते को लेने के वजह से उन्हें बीच में एक ऐसा एरिया क्रॉस करना पड़ता है जो आइसोलेटेड है, सेक्लूटेड है, जहाँ पे ज़्यादा लोग नहीं रहते हैं। तो वहाँ पर उनके साथ ईव टीजिंग भी होती है। कई बार कुछ लोग जो हैं वो लड़के खड़े होते हैं और उन्हें परेशानी होती है इस वजह से। तो ये जो आने जाने का जो पूरी कहानी है, केवल थकाने वाली कहानी नहीं कि 7-8 किलोमीटर पैदल चल रहे हैं, वो अनसेफ भी है कहीं ना कहीं। एक और कहानी है जो मेरी एक स्टूडेंट है, मैं हिस्ट्री पढ़ाती हूँ, इतिहास पढ़ाती हूँ, तो इतिहास की ही स्टूडेंट है जो करीब 70 किलोमीटर दूर एक डिस्ट्रिक्ट है वहाँ से रोज़ पढ़ने आती थी। और वो पैदल अपने घर से चलती थी स्टेशन में वो बिना टिकट लिए ट्रेन ट्रैवल करती थी। और फिर वो हमारे दुमका स्टेशन में उतरती थी, वहाँ से 6 किलोमीटर यूनिवर्सिटी पहुँचती थी, क्लास करती थी, फिर 6 किलोमीटर वापस जाती थी और बिना टिकट के वो जाती थी ताकि उसे 1 रुपये भी खर्च ना करना पड़े। और वो लड़की रोज़ यूनिवर्सिटी आती थी। और मैं बस इसी बात को यहाँ पर रख कर के एंड करूँगी। हम लोग बाद में उस पर और बात कर सकते हैं कि ये जो लड़कियाँ हैं जो इतना थक करके और इतना इनसिक्योर स्पेस को नेविगेट करते हुए यूनिवर्सिटी पहुँच रही हैं, फिर वापस लौट रही हैं, तो उस थकान और उस स्ट्रेस के बाद वो क्या पढ़ती होंगी अपने हॉस्टल में और अपने लॉज में। और जब आप हॉस्टल और लॉज की स्थिति देखेंगे तो एक रूम में करीब 5 से 6 लड़कियां रह रही हैं। उसी रूम में वो खाना बनाती हैं क्योंकि मेस फैसिलिटी नहीं है। पानी उन्हें या तो कुएं से या हैंडपम्प से लेकर के आना पड़ता है अपने बाथरूम में या घर रूम पे खाना बनाने को। और मान लो उस थकान के बाद भी वो अगर पढ़ना भी चाह रही तो वो स्पेस नहीं है जहाँ पर वो शांति से पढ़ाई कर सके। तो ये जो स्ट्रगल है ये इसे जब मैं देखती हूँ एक टीचर के रूप में तो मुझे इसके आंसर्स नहीं दिखते हैं कि कैसे इतने स्ट्रगल कर पा रही हैं और क्यों कर रही हैं, क्योंकि उस एमए की डिग्री के बाद कोई गारंटी नहीं कि उन्हें जॉब मिलेगी, और मिलेगी भी तो बहुत ही ऐसे जॉब जिसकी टेन्योर परमानेंट नहीं है। तो वो क्या ऐसी चीज़ है जो उन्हें ड्राइव करती है इतना स्ट्रगल रोज़ करने के लिए। तो इसके आंसर्स मेरे पास नहीं है, लेकिन मैं चाहूँगी कि हम लोग जब बातचीत करें तो उत्तर निकल करके आए। शुक्रिया।
Thank you, Amita. Yeah. Shailja,
Thank you, Breakthrough.
you can speak in English, she said. If you
Thank you, Breakthrough, and thank you, panelists, thank you, moderator. और आज सुबह में जो चर्चा हुई उसके लिए भी बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद, क्योंकि उससे काफ़ी कुछ दिमाग में ताज़ा हो गया। तो मैं अंग्रेज़ी और हिंदी मिला के बातचीत करूँगी। तो जहाँ पे शायद अमिता ने अपनी कहानी एक बहुत ही अच्छा एक क्लोज इन डेप्थ हमें एक लेंस दिया, मैं वहीं से थोड़ा वाइडन करना चाहती हूँ। मैं झारखंड में लास्ट 4 साल से काम कर रही हूँ ऑन डिफरेंट काइंड्स ऑफ प्रोजेक्ट्स एंड डिफरेंट काइंड्स ऑफ रिसर्च प्रोजेक्ट, पॉलिसी रिसर्च प्रोजेक्ट, जहाँ पे मल्टी सेक्टोरल लेंस से मैंने एडोलेसेंट एडोलेसेंट और बच्चों को कैसे देखा जाता है, पॉलिसीज़ में उनकी क्या जगह है। एडोलेसेंट जब बोलते हैं तो ओके, so I've just been given this note that there is a translation accessibility, so I will speak in English. But just to say, I can speak in Hindi and Bangla. So when I started working in Jharkhand in the 4 years, I've worked across different kinds of thematics, but primarily focused on adolescents. So one of the questions that I have often sat with is, how is an adolescent constituted? Within programs, within policies, within the departments. I've also closely interacted with the state departments of health and education, and primarily looked at how they have been thinking through adolescence. And mind you, they have been thinking through, and they've been thinking through for a very long time. It's a state that has gained its independence for developmental goals. So the departments have also a very strong role to play in how adolescent projects get introduced, managed. And of course, there's a very large CSO and CBO network in Jharkhand, which is the lifeline of how these programs are getting implemented. Both the implementation projects from where action research work happens. A lot of early research work, which was not academical, which were not within academia, are actually implementation research and action research work, which then fed into program interventions. And then there are think tanks and research organizations that have also worked extensively. And the reason why I'm kind of laying it out is because I've actually worked with a lot of these institutions and also independently. And the question that I've often sat through is that when grants are being written, and when projects are being conceptualized, there is a gymnastics of vulnerability that gets played out whenever an adolescent person is constituted. And at this point in history, in the last 5 years, adolescent girl is on everyone's agenda, whether it is STEM for learning, and STEM for learning largely focuses on coding, not physics, chemistry, biology. Because physics, chemistry, biology are very complex skills for which you need foundational skills of literacy and numeracy. Then you have gender equity programs. The state has also championed gender equity programs. But if you ever speak to the department, an interesting insight that you will hear is that they will say, "Hum karte hain, हम adolescent health and wellness program करते हैं, which is where gender gets practiced in states, in districts where there are no CSOs and CBOs, because there are districts where there are no CSOs, no CBOs. And that's where the state implementation teams and state research programs happen. And these are very large quantitative research programs that happen. Which, I mean, if you check who are the researchers, you would be excited to know that there are some of the largest quantitative researchers who actually look at state implementation research. And they produce knowledge products. They produce knowledge products on platforms whose navigation I would like you to go and find out for yourself. So this is the context within which I'm going to share what I have to, what my reflections are on the breakthrough insights, and also larger insights that have come from other gender equity programs, other STEM for learning programs, climate change programs that are essentially now looking at gender plus. But I'd also like to say that gender still remains very binary. And every team, and I think, and I resonate, I understand, the gender binary comes because a big question is, but आप field में कैसे पूछेंगे ये सवाल? But वही तो training है. So one of my experience as a gender researcher is, because I am a feminist non-binary researcher, one of my practices कि मैं उन सवालों को, I want to, personally, technically what I do is I make those questions open, which resulted in very interesting things with pre-adolescent research that was conducted within ICRW project. There we discovered a lot of atypical gender performances, where boys were not necessarily behaving like boys, and what were the challenges. What kind of masculinity punishments would come their way. Somebody asked a question on masculinity, and that's also on agenda these days. So it was interesting to hear all of the challenges that a community thinks through. And a community within a school is a very powerful community. It has adolescents, it has pre-adolescents, it has teachers, it has Anganwadi workers who will cook for you. It has an HM, a school leader, who then ends up bringing the stories together. And the politics of the HM is also pretty powerful. If that HM is a district trainer, he will have a very different approach to doing, to implementing, or to kind of pushing through a gender research program or a gender program. And one of the things that as gender researchers, evaluators, that a lot of gender researchers would face is, पर आप ये क्यों पूछ रहे हैं? ये तो हमारी reality है. जैसे काफ़ी लोगों ने, like a lot of people asked us, or what was presented as well, that what will the community get out of it? In many other countries, indigenous communities have figured out ways in which indigenous research can be accessed. We are still in the process. It's a learning journey that we'll all, I think, take collectively. And the more and more different kinds of population gain educational leverage, and educational leverage is a very powerful leverage, the more they will be able to access what is ideally constituted as agency. Since I have 2 minutes, so in 2 minutes I will just rethink what as a researcher I have figured. I figured is that agency of an adolescent person is actually constituted not just by parents, which is what easily comes across from a lot. I mean, you ask the field, the field will say that let the parents be educated, and in 15 years' time, we'll meet this outcome. And I've heard teachers say that. if you hear departments, they will also say some interesting things that shift is happening, shift has happened. But every person is reconstituting an adolescent person. The researcher is equally important reconstituting person, because the questions that we go with to the field is going to reflect on the field. The field is going to reflect, and the field reflects. Whether you're collecting that reflection or not, whether you're doing the analysis with them or not, whether your project is community engaged or not, the field is going to ask you the same questions. And I've now worked across 9 districts, and 9 districts with different kinds of even corporate interventions. There are Tuileries districts, and each of these districts have their own micro stories. And those micro stories will, like, the insights that came through, those insights are general leveler. You will hear them across all the 24 districts of Jharkhand. I don't know if I got the number right. But each microsite has its own narrative, has its own, because an adolescent adult, a teenage married adolescent, has agency. Like, and I'll end on this. This is what I learned in the field from an adolescent person. They saw me writing my notes on my copy, and they told me, दीदी आप कॉपी में क्यों लिख रहे हैं, आप फ़ोन में रिकॉर्ड कर लीजिए ना, मैं आपको फ़ोन में रिकॉर्ड. So today I prepared my notes on phone. And the adolescent people are very technology savvy. If they can access a phone, which a lot of adolescent, female-bodied adolescent can't. And that is a reality. If they can access a phone, they do make use of it. They learn content from it, they learn discourse from it, and they engage by content creators. Another and very last bit, a project that I looked at was how content creation is now becoming a way in which adolescents are participating. But that's like an emerging thing that, I mean, that needs to be seen more clearly. Like, what kind of content are they producing? What is it that they are getting out of it? But I mean, agency is being exercised at different points of time, and agency is being constituted. Both of those things are happening.
Thank you, Amita, Shalja. Thank you, Manjusha and Breakthrough, for inviting me to be part of this. Today, what I'd like to share actually is a bit of a pedagogical practice. I mean, since we are talking about agency and empowerment, I lead the Third Eye with the Nirantar Trust. Third Eye is a feminist publishing platform, but it also has this thing called what we call the Learning Lab, in which we run 2, 3, 4 forms of mentorships. All of it is experimental and evolving, but all of it rests on certain pedagogical principles, which I think I would like to take you through after we watch a clip.
आदाब, मैं खुशी लखनऊ शहर की रहने वाली हूँ. मुझे हाल ही में रील प्रोजेक्ट पर काम करने को दिया गया, जिसको लेकर मैं बहुत उत्साहित थी, क्योंकि उस प्रोजेक्ट के तहत मुझे अपनी उस ज़िंदगी को दिखाना है जो मैं असल में जीना चाहती हूँ. फिर मेरे दिमाग में उथल पुथल होने लगी कि मैं अपनी दूसरी ज़िंदगी कैसे दिखाऊं. तभी मेरे दिमाग में एक आइडिया आया, क्यों ना फेक प्रोफाइल बनाई जाए और उसका नाम रोशनी रखे.
Khushi is part of Digital Educators Program, what we call. They're people from structurally marginalized locations and gender identities. And we work, a lot of it we do is online. It's an online kind of mentorship. And they're mentored by a variety of people, from documentarians to photographers to narrative makers and so on and so forth. Khushi developed this film because of an exercise we gave in class, because we kept running into this problem. It's like we were, what Amita said really struck home is कि ये करती क्यों हैं ये? It's so difficult, why do they do it? And this we say every time, na, that things are so difficult. It's women who work with violence, it's case workers. It's so difficult. Why do they continue doing it? What is it that drives them? And we kept running into a wall as to the articulation of the drive, right? Because it was always us saying, what is it that drives this? So we set out an exercise which was that they had to make fake profiles on social media. And in that fake profile, they could change everything from their caste to gender. And through these fake profiles is when people started articulating many, many, many things. This film is a culmination of what Khushi's fantasy is, right? Of Khushi's fake profile is. Eventually, she won the Toto Award for Best Short Film. And she went and spoke in Bangalore and so on and so forth. But it doesn't mean that her current life has changed. In the way we sort of usually measure change or measure impact. But this kind of pedagogical work, which now we are in our 4th year, has at least begged us to ask, what is that moment of agential change? And we are deeply invested in those moments. And we continue to recognize that it is not linear. It may not even be iterative. But the moments, as long as one can invest in increasing the frequency of agential moments, something shifts. For us, the agential moment that we are interested in comes from the act of creation. We feel the very act of making and not speaking. It's not about speaking, it's about making. The act of making is an agential moment. And we have seen that now through multiple sort of batches and mentorships and people. And this also sort of has crystallized. I mean, we work in digital mediums, but this rests very firmly in the Nirantar history of making, which we saw in Caballeria before that. When two things happen in the act of making, right? It's like you have to take out time and you have to make space. And then you have to facilitate critical thinking processes. The act of creating those critical thinking processes sometimes give birth to agential moments. And I think that is what, as practitioners, we are interested in. The other thing that we feel like, and I know empowerment has sort of lost its sheen now. People don't say empowerment anymore. But which we find really empowering is that this is the first time that Nirantar has worked with all genders. So there's men, women, trans, in the same kind of a classroom, so to speak. These are online batches that we run, right? So it is boys, girls, men, women together doing what you have to do. They're also shooting exercise that then they have to meet physically and go and shoot, that leads to its own kinds of really interesting things, but also very new kinds of issues and problems. But sitting together and listening to other contexts from other countries, from other states in the same country, we find that it seems to be very empowering. You know, this was sort of like the relic of the public university, right? That we could sit and have these deep critical thinking moments with people from other contexts as young people. And something about being able to share those spaces with other people who don't come from your contexts forces you to confront yourself, which is sort of like eventually the central pillar of our pedagogy, which is sort of an unpacking of self. A lot of time, like the longest batch we run is 18 months. Most of the time, it is just about unpacking yourself, self-work, look at yourself, look at your own biases. You may be Dalit, you may be coming from the most marginalized locations, but look at your own bias. How do you see other contexts? And what we have found, again, is that at a practice level, what that does is that the minute you start understanding other contexts, your own context suddenly becomes visible to you. You know, so that thing where you are constantly actually resisting, where somebody said, no, you're ready to even give up your rights. You're ready to, because ab samajh nahi aa raha ke, why, it's okay, I won't claim this, I won't claim this. But when you visualize other contexts, and I think this act of deep listening is the thing, is something awakens, we have seen. Like you listen to another context and you start listening to your own context. And then something starts shifting. I know I only have 2 minutes, but to just also say that all of this we term under this feminist narrative making or whatever, but these are eventually, it's just language. What we are really, really, really interested in is the compounding of these moments. And what we're interested in doing it is, of course, through the sensorial. So not through conceptual ideas, not through theory, purely through sensorial. So we spend a lot of time on sound exercises, on recorder, as opposed to the camera. In fact, like with this batch, we have entered with sound. Like for months, all the people do is just go around with sound recorders and just record whatever they feel like. What that does is that suddenly you are aware of your own spatial realities, your own psychogeographies. And the articulation then, which is again something that continues to stun us, and a lot of it is eventually produced and put on third eye, but you know, a lot of it is also not, is what continues to stun us is that this articulation carries this simultaneous agency, but also vulnerability. And I don't think that otherwise, you know, we have made space for agency to exist with vulnerability. And to also see that agency actually might be continuously being contradicted by a certain vulnerability, which actually is the humanness of that person, you know. And so just one example, and maybe I can close with that, is as part of this learning lab, we run something called the Caseworkers Dictionary of Violence, where caseworkers are essentially creating a vocabulary around GBV. Because all the GBV thing is from the West, and how do women actually live here and so on. And all the time, no, we were always this thing. It's always that women who work with violence are often also living in violent homes. You could be someone who will be fighting for another woman's right to justice, but you will be living in a violent situation and you will continue to do so. And we sort of, instead of forcing ourselves to see it as a contradiction, we, through writing processes, they wrote for 8 months. We created writer rooms for them. Again, this worked online. And this series is called Women Who Don't Leave. I mean, the kind of material and the kind of insight there is into what agency looks like. I mean, I've rarely seen that uttered by people who actually write on GBV, you know. And that is an agential moment, even if she comes back home, which continues to be violent. So that's, I think my time is up, though I had many points. Thank you.
I don't know how we're doing with time, or whether we've run out of time. We have 5 minutes. Okay, just very quickly, if I can just say a few things. One is, I'll start with Shabani, and I really liked what you said was very important, because we again see agency as some kind of Manichaean point. You know, you have to reach there. It's you know, it's inevitable. If you haven't reached there, then you know, if it's failed and so on. And I think that indeterminacy, which we never want to look at, you know, the uncertainty, the fact that things are not definitely, you know, that determined in time and space is very important for individuals, and it's what makes us human, right? I mean, it can't be any other. The other thing I think that you brought in, which is very, very important, and since everyone here does work with you young people, with girls and so on, is the question of how do we define the adolescent, as Sailza also said. Who is this adolescent? And we have got, unfortunately, a bit trapped by global discourses around childhood and youth. And so we think that it's only 18, and after that it's, and before that it's one kind of a person, and after that it's another. And I think that this is really deeply problematic, especially when you look at young women, but also, I mean, generally. And I'm really glad that you brought in that whole problematizing who the adolescent is in policy, which is really very stark, but also in the context of actually working with women. And, you could have so-called very young women, and, and how does one actually sort of question this and open this up? Amita, I think what you ended with is something that's very important. I just want to, again, go back to that question of what is it that you finally learn after so much struggle? What is it? What is that experience? And it's definitely an experience that you're looking forward to after walking those 60, whatever, or traveling all that while, and 10, 12 kilometers, going ticketless, and, that continuous sort of pervasive insecurity. You don't know what you're going to get at the end of it, but it's still something that you want to do. But what is it that you're actually learning? And I think this, especially for those who teach in universities, is becoming a bigger and bigger issue, because you're not even being allowed to really experiment as much. Things are, curricula getting very centralized, and so on. So it's actually a struggle even in that side. And I want to flag this. I think it's a very important question. So thank you. I mean, we got an insight into crisis, but we also got an insight into, how do we sort of look at the crisis in terms of agential change. And thank you very much, all three of you.
हाँ, मैं ये कहना चाह रहा हूँ कि बहुत सारे रिपोर्ट्स बताएं कि गर्ल्स का इनरोलमेंट बढ़ रहा है, महिलाएं एडोलसेंट या यंग वीमेन हैं, वो अब कॉलेज में आ रही हैं, पढ़ने आ रही हैं. अच्छा है, बहुत अच्छा है, लेकिन अंदर क्या बच जा रहा है ऐसा चीज़ आपके रिसर्च में, जो उस चीज़ को आप अनवील करें, थोड़ा हाईलाइट करें.
मेरा भी एक प्रश्न था कि my Hindi is very bad. I'm a Mumbaikar, so you'll have to. A lot of what we are hearing, whether it's this acceptance of dowry and and so on, even the question of more girls, nobody so far has mentioned the phenomenon of male out-migration. And if you could just also maybe, I thought maybe this is a point at which you can talk.
नंदिनी ने जैसा बताया कि जो हमारे यूनिवर्सिटी में अगर लड़कियों की संख्या ज़्यादा है, मैं अपनी यूनिवर्सिटी की ये बात कर पाऊँगी, बाहर मुझे नहीं पता, क्योंकि मैं इसी कॉन्टेक्स्ट को समझ पा रही हूँ कि हमारे यूनिवर्सिटी में लड़कियाँ जो हैं वो 70% लड़कियाँ हैं. देयर आर 70% गर्ल्स इन आवर यूनिवर्सिटी. द बॉयज़ दे आर वेरी लेस अक्रॉस ऑल द डिसिप्लिन्स. जो मुझे लगता है, एक तो जो लड़के हैं उनके स्टडी को फाइनेंस कर देते हैं उनके माता पिता. अच्छा, हमारी जो यूनिवर्सिटी है स्टेट यूनिवर्सिटी है, जहाँ पर पढ़ने को बहुत कम पैसे लगते हैं. तो जो लड़के हैं, और ये स्टेट यूनिवर्सिटी है, अंडर फंडेड स्टेट यूनिवर्सिटी है, जहाँ पे पढ़ाई का माहौल, क्वालिटी बहुत अच्छी नहीं है, तो लड़कियाँ यहाँ आ जाती हैं, और जो लड़के हैं उनको फ़ंड करके पटना, रांची या दिल्ली भेज दिया जाता है. इसलिए भी लड़कियों की संख्या ज़्यादा है. दूसरा कारण ये है कि चूँकि ये आदिवासी कम्युनिटी है, तो मेल माइग्रेशन, आउट माइग्रेशन बहुत ज़्यादा है, इसलिए भी लड़कियों की संख्या ज़्यादा है, जैसा नंदिनी ने बताया, और उसका असर सीधे सीधे दिखता है. तीसरी चीज़ ये है कि जो लड़के हैं वो चूँकि इकोनॉमिकली मार्जिनलाइज सेक्शन है, तो बहुत सारे लड़के डेली वेज लेबर में काम कर रहे हैं या वहीं पर उसी शहर में काम कर रहे हैं, और वो एजुकेशन नहीं ले पा रहे हैं. तो घर की लड़कियां हैं जो एजुकेशन का भार भी लेकर के वो कोई ना कोई जॉब ढूंढ रही हैं. तो उस तरह से जब मैं अपने लड़कियों को देखती हूँ, हमारे यूनिवर्सिटी की लड़कियों को देखती हूँ, तो मुझे लगता है कि वो अपने घर के डोमेस्टिक रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटीज़ तो उठा ही रही हैं, घर के फ्यूचर फाइनेंस और सिक्योरिटी का क्या होगा वो भार भी वो लेकर के जी रही है, क्योंकि उन्हें वो डिग्री हासिल करनी है। कहीं पर कुछ भी जॉब अपॉर्चुनिटी मिल जाए, क्योंकि पीजी की डिग्री अंडर ग्रेजुएट की डिग्री से बेहतर है, तो उन्हें ज़्यादा चांस है कोई भी लोअर लेवल कॉन्ट्रैक्चुअल जॉब के लिए। तो वो सारे भार को लेकर के वो जीती है, जो अपने आप में एक बहुत बड़ा स्ट्रगल है। और यहीं पे मैं एजेंसी की भी बात लाना चाहूँगी, क्योंकि हम एजेंसी को एक इंडिविजुअल ऑटोनॉमी, रेसिस्टेंस इस तरह से देखते हैं, लेकिन एजेंसी को ये जो म्यूटेड नेगोशिएशंस है, जो ट्रेडिशनल स्ट्रक्चर्स के भीतर जो नेगोशिएशन ये लड़कियां रोज़ कर रही हैं, ये भी तो एजेंसी का एक्सरसाइज ही है मुझे लगता है। और मैं क्योंकि समय कम था तो मैं एक और बात यहाँ रखना चाहूँगी। जब हम आदिवासी कम्युनिटी को देखते हैं तो हमें एजेंसी को कम्युनिटी के भीतर भी रख करके देखना बहुत ज़रूरी है। एक हॉस्टल जो हमारे स्टडी का हिस्सा था, वो हॉस्टल डिस्ट्रिक्ट एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन उस बिल्डिंग को लड़कियों को नहीं दे रहा था, आदिवासी लड़कियों को। तो आदिवासी लड़के और लड़कियां दोनों ने मिलकर के एक लंबा आंदोलन किया और फिर वो यूनिवर्सिटी को मतलब वो आदिवासी लड़कियों को वो हॉस्टल डिस्ट्रिक्ट एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन ने हैंड ओवर किया। तो ये भी एक एजेंसी का एक्सरसाइज है कम्युनिटी स्ट्रक्चर के भीतर। तो मुझे लगता है कि एजेंसी का जो हमारा कॉन्सेप्ट है उसको हम ब्रॉडन करके देखें तो बेहतर होगा।
Hi, thank you so much. I think even Shalini, I think your name. Shells. I'm sorry about your name. I think you also raised a good point before Shabana ji spoke about the whole digital shift, and you just started with the thing that like maybe Reels or Instagram or content creation can be a part. And I think what Learning Lab is doing is great, and I don't have much knowledge about it, but I also, this is more like a food for thought or just a conversation, because it is also a very new shift, bringing digitalizing our advocacy, let's say. So I just wanted to know about Roshni, Khushi's story. Did you all follow up with her? Because you said that, her life remains the same. So I am just curious to understand, there might be this dystopian, feeling that might have emerged in an adolescent. I'm not saying not in the older category of people who might have participated, but in the younger, to really find the difference of reality. Because going in the so-called fake profile, which has caused a lot of problem, as we know, where is that line do we want to draw, for that agential moment? How much should we push is a conversation or something that I'm sure you might be doing a follow-up, I don't know, but I'm just, that just sort of struck to me that this is something we have to handle it better. Thank you.
Khushi is training to be a mentor at the lab now. So she finished the 18-month course and now she's a mentor at the lab. I think I should rephrase that her life remains the same. What I meant was that the fantasy of her life is not necessarily the life, right? And honestly, as feminists, we've engaged with fantasy so much, I don't see a problem in that at all. Like, I don't think there's a danger in that. Once this film actually got recognition and it won an award, her family, everyone has seen it. Her mohalla has seen it. She works with adolescent girls herself. She's a trainer now. And everybody has seen it. And everybody thinks that, hey, that's a really cool thing that you did, right? But what I mean is that now if we had to, use a certain kind of Western paradigm and start mapping ki ab Khushi ne shaadi kab kari, when should she have children, does she want to have children, and start aligning agency with all that paradigm, you may not get that. She may do this, but she may also do that. And then as feminists, are we okay to look at agency in that way? Also as feminists, are we able to look at the imagination as a relevant site for agency? And a lot of feminist literature and films have dealt with that. I mean, even if you see Agnes Varda's work, or the imagination is as much as a sight as reality. I mean, reality, especially today, is really overrated. So, if imagination is a space that one could facilitate a conversation in, yeah, we'd only be part of a feminist history.
Yeah, sorry. My question is just quick to Miss Amita ji. Actually, मेरा नाम उस्मान है और मैं मुस्लिम गर्ल्स के साथ में मेरा ज़्यादा काम रहा है, तो मैं एक चीज़ समझना चाह रहा था आपकी स्टडी में क्या ऐसा कुछ आया है क्या? क्योंकि डेटा जो यहाँ पे कोई डेटा की बात कर रहा था, मुस्लिम एजुकेशन में भी डेटा दिखा रहा है कि गर्ल्स पार्टिसिपेशन इज़ हायर देन मैन. इट इज़ लाइक माइनर डिफरेंस बट इट इज़ देयर. बट द थिंग इज़ दैट जो मेरी फाइंडिंग्स आ रही है या जितना भी मैं काम कर रहा हूँ वेस्टर्न यूपी एंड उत्तराखंड में, तो वहाँ पे ये आ रहा है कि जो लड़कियों को पढ़ाने का एक जो माहौल क्रिएट हुआ है उसका एक कारण ये भी है क्योंकि पेरेंट्स जो फैमिलीज़ हैं उनको अच्छे मैचेस नहीं मिल रहे थे लड़कियों के लिए. एंड दे आर लुकिंग, क्योंकि लड़के पढ़ रहे हैं तो दे आर डिमांडिंग, दे वांट एजुकेटेड गर्ल. तो दे आर स्ट्रगलिंग कि लड़कियों की शादी कैसे करें. तो दे आर like motivating girls to pursue education but at certain level and in certain subjects, and they also want to spend some certain money. They are not going to allow them to do engineering or management courses. First thing is that, and the second is that whoever, like another discourse is also coming in my findings. जो men हैं who are educated, like Muslim men, and they married to educated girls, and then they didn't survive with their patriarchy and they took divorce. So they are saying well educated girls नहीं होनी चाहिए because they are not ready to sustain in marriage. So both dilemma is going on. So my question is to you, is there some kind of findings in your research as well where, like, I don't know, because people are talking about tribe community, but tribe, they are Muslim as well, but Muslim word is not coming out in Jharkhand. So is there were even in breakthrough study as well, were there in Muslim girls in that participate in that study, और आपकी study में कोई Muslim girls थी, तो what is the scenario?
There are Muslim girls who come to our university to study, and most of these girls, they are married. So that's very it's a positive thing that comes out of it, because the in-laws, they are actually funding their education. So and there are very few examples of Muslim girls, so I won't be able to answer your question. But when it comes to marriage prospects, कि अच्छी पढ़ाई होगी तो अच्छे matches मिलेंगे, that does not apply much to Adivasi communities, because the parents, they don't do the matchmaking. Adivasi community is quite liberal in that sense that they find their own matches. So I don't think that applies much to Adivasi communities where I did my study.
I'd like to respond to, because I've engaged in Goda, and one particular, actually number of schools where number of Muslim girls and boys in the classrooms were bit more than other communities. So interesting thing in two particular schools was that who is the school leader and what does the school leader want. So I have like two examples, one in which the school leader wants his school to be a model school. That's also a thing that happens in Jharkhand, Adarsh Vidyalaya. So when it's an Adarsh Vidyalaya, you become like a showcase school, right? And a showcase school wants its agendas to be on point. So this one model school that we engaged with, the principal, the school leaders, they were on point about nahi, ladkiyan aati hai, the retention is higher, they come, we encourage them to take on different kinds of career journeys. But when we engaged with the girls, there were interesting conversations, the kind of uniforms they could wear. In Jharkhand, you can opt to wear a salwar kameez, or you can wear skirts. And families dictate, or so it was interesting, right? The girls said, ki hamara muhalla. So my neighborhood, more than parents, neighborhood becomes a space of scrutiny for them, because they have to walk all the way to school. And all of them walk with or without cycles. So that's one thing. And then another school where the school leader was not very, so we had also done that kind of a selection on the basis of where the school was, closer to the district remote from the district, because that changes the dynamic in which the school operates. The school is a physical space. The girls live in a physical space. So in this particular school, where it was in the remote area, again, the number of Muslim population in that village itself was larger, and the school leader was not invested in it. The dropout rates were higher, the teachers' complaints were higher, the students complained about early marriages by the time they got to grades 8, because 11 and 12 haven't happened. And 11 and 12, as they are happening, is happening with teachers till grades 8. So the school ecosystem in Jharkhand, like in many other states, it's also not to just constantly corner Jharkhand, is a very complex ecosystem that exists in a physical space with possibilities, accessibilities, and neighborhoods.